Greek legend Achilles. The invincible warrior with a fatal flaw. Picture this. A mother so desperate to save her child that she strikes a bargain with death itself. But what happens when that protection becomes the very instrument of destruction? This is the paradox of Achilles, the warrior whose invincibility became his curse, and whose legend would echo through millennia as the ultimate cautionary tale about hubris, fate, and the price of greatness. The prophecy that started everything. Long before Achilles drew his first breath, the threads of his destiny were already being woven by the fates themselves. When the sea nymph Thetis was about to give birth, a chilling prophecy emerged from the oracle. Her son would become the greatest warrior who ever lived, but he would die young in battle. Imagine being told your child would achieve immortal glory, but only through an early grave. Thetis chose defiance against destiny itself. Under the cover of darkness, she carried her infant son to the banks of the river Styx, the mystical boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The river's waters possessed the power to grant invulnerability to mortal flesh, but at a terrible cost. As she held baby Achilles by his heel and dipped him into the black waters, she unknowingly sealed his fate in the most ironic way possible. The very spot where her protective grip shielded him from the water's touch would become his undoing. But here rests what most people don't realize about this famous scene. Thetis had actually tried another method first. Ancient sources tell us she had been secretly burning away her son's mortal parts in fire each night, planning to make him fully divine. Her husband Peleus discovered her and stopped the process in horror, leaving Achilles caught between mortality and godhood, vulnerability and invincibility. The education of a killer. While other children learned to read and write, Achilles was studying the art of war under the most unlikely of teachers. Chiron, the wise centaur known for his knowledge of medicine and music, became the boy's mentor. This wasn't your typical military academy. Chiron taught Achilles not just how to kill, but how to heal, not just warfare, but wisdom, not just strength, but strategy. The centaur's cave became a classroom where legend was forged. Here, young Achilles learned to hunt the fiercest beasts, to read the flight patterns of birds for omens, and to play the lyre with such skill that even the gods wept. But most crucially, Chiron taught him the warrior's code, that honor was worth more than life itself, and that a glorious death was infinitely preferable to a long-forgotten existence. Consider the psychological impact of this education. Achilles was being trained not just as a warrior, but as a living weapon designed for a single, spectacular purpose. Every skill he learned, every strength he developed, was aimed at one inevitable destination, the battlefields of Troy. The draft dodger's disguise. When the call to war finally came, something unexpected happened. The invincible warrior tried to run. Thetis, still fighting against prophecy, disguised her son as a girl and hid him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Skyros. Picture the greatest warrior in Greek legend, dressed in women's clothing, pretending to spin thread and weave tapestries. But Odysseus, the master of cunning, saw through the deception with a trick that would make modern psychologists proud. He arrived at the court dressed as a merchant, offering gifts of jewelry and fine cloth to the women. Hidden among these feminine treasures, he placed a sword and shield. While the real daughters of Lycomedes admired the jewelry, Achilles the maiden instinctively grabbed the weapons. The moment Achilles' fingers closed around that sword hilt, his fate was sealed. The disguise fell away, and the warrior who had been hiding from his destiny stepped forward to embrace it. The rage that launched 1,000 ships at Troy, Achilles became something beyond human understanding. He wasn't just unbeatable. He was supernatural in his ferocity. Ancient accounts describe him moving across the battlefield like a force of nature, his bronze armor gleaming like fire, his war cry striking terror into the hearts of enemies before they even saw him coming. But here's where the story takes its most fascinating turn. The very quality that made Achilles unstoppable, his legendary rage, also became his greatest weakness. When his beloved companion Patroclus was killed by the Trojan prince Hector, Achilles' grief transformed into something monstrous. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted to make the very gods weep. The description of Achilles' mourning is one of the most psychologically complex passages in ancient literature. He rolled in the dirt, tore his hair, and refused to eat or drink. His mother Thetis, hearing his cries from the depths of the ocean, knew immediately what had happened. The sound of her son's anguish was unlike anything she had heard before, a keening wail that spoke of a soul being torn apart. The duel that decided everything. When Achilles finally faced Hector beneath the walls of Troy, it wasn't just a fight between two warriors, it was a collision between two different concepts of heroism. Hector fought for his family, his city, his people. Achilles fought for something far more dangerous, eternal glory. The duel was over before it began. Hector, brave as he was, knew he couldn't win. He ran. 3 times around the walls of Troy, the greatest Trojan hero fled from the Greek champion, while both armies watched in stunned silence. When Achilles finally caught him, the outcome was never in doubt. But what Achilles did next shocked even his own allies. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around the city walls, day after day in full view of the Trojan king Priam and Queen Hecuba. This wasn't warfare. This was something else entirely. Something that crossed the line between heroism and monstrosity. The arrow that found its mark. Paris, the prince whose theft of Helen had started the entire war, was not known for his warrior skills. He was a lover, not a fighter, more comfortable in the bedroom than on the battlefield. Which makes what happened next even more remarkable. Guided by Apollo, god of prophecy and plague, Paris drew back his bow and aimed not for Achilles' chest or head, but for the one spot where the great warrior could be harmed. The arrow flew true, striking Achilles in the heel, the only part of his body that had never touched the waters of Styx. The poison spread quickly. As Achilles lay dying, he could feel his strength ebbing away from that one tiny wound. The invincible warrior, who had cut through armies like wheat before a scythe, was being killed by an injury that wouldn't have slowed down an ordinary soldier. But here's what makes his death even more tragic. Achilles had known it was coming. The prophecy had given him a choice, and he had chosen glory over longevity. In his final moments, as he felt the darkness closing in, did he regret that choice? The legacy that conquered death. Achilles died at Troy, but his story was just beginning. Within decades, his tomb became a pilgrimage site. Alexander the Great, centuries later, visited the grave and declared himself a descendant of Achilles, using the legend to justify his own conquests. Roman emperors claimed the warrior's bloodline. Medieval knights modeled themselves on his example. The phrase Achilles' heel entered every language, becoming shorthand for fatal weakness. Modern psychologists use Achilles' complex to describe narcissistic personality disorders. Military strategists still study his tactics. Hollywood keeps retelling his story because audiences can't get enough of this paradoxical hero. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Achilles isn't his strength or his weakness, his victories or his death. It's that a character created over 3,000 years ago still feels psychologically real to us today. His rage, his grief, his pride, his fear of being forgotten, these are emotions we recognize immediately. The question that haunts us still in the end. Achilles forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. What would we choose if we could have ultimate power but only briefly, or moderate success but lasting? His mother offered him this choice explicitly, prophesying he could live a long, peaceful life in obscurity or achieve immortal fame through an early death. He chose glory and, in doing so, became more than human. He became myth, legend, a story that has survived the fall of empires and the rise of civilizations. Every time we face our own crucial decisions, every time we must choose between safety and greatness, the ghost of Achilles whispers in our ear, "What legacy will you leave behind?" The invincible warrior with the fatal flaw teaches us that our greatest strengths and our deepest weaknesses are often the same thing. That the very qualities that make us extraordinary can also destroy us. That immortality comes not from avoiding death, but from creating something that transcends it. In the end, Achilles got exactly what he wanted, a story so powerful that we're still telling it today. His heel may have been his weakness, but his legend became his immortality.